Welcome to
Urban Beginnings.
a podcast about navigating urban planning and its impact on community. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Urban Beginnings. Today, we'll be talking about Senate Bill 4, so SB4. How you doing, Blair?
Doing pretty good. It's been a minute. It's been a
Yeah,
minute, but doing well. How about you? How are you?
pretty good, pretty good. Glad to finally do some content with you. So I'm glad to we finally found
Yep.
some time. Um, but yeah, let's get straight into it. Let me
Let's do it.
define, or let me read to you what Senate Bill 4 is. Also known as the Affordable Housing on Faith Lands Act, is a California land enacted in October 2023 to allow faith-based institutions and nonprofit colleges to build affordable housing on their land without the usual local zoning barriers.
Also known as the Yes in God's Backyard Bill.
Is it?
Uh, I mean, I'm not sure all the people are calling it that, but I did see that in an article. So,
Uh, well, well. So, based on your research, what are some of the highlights that you would like to point out?
yeah, I mean, I know you're a little bit more expert than me, and I definitely
No, no,
have
no.
more questions than answers. But, I'm definitely interested in getting into a little bit more about how SB4 can streamline the process for affordable housing development. And I'm also really interested in kind of looking at, so the bill was passed when again in
Okay.
2023.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, what does the rollout look like? I feel like we've been introduced to a lot of plans or ideas around, or mechanisms that is for, deepening the existing housing supply that, have been a little lackluster. We're in a affordability and a housing crisis. So yeah, I think there's some opportunity there for sure. It opens up, great opportunities for, nonprofits, faith-based institutions. Obviously that limits other types of folks from development opportunities. But yeah, I'm eager to hear about the streamlining part, and I'm eager to hear about sort of, you know, what's actually possible. I know, I believe in one article I looked at, it talked about the actual amount of like acres that are available for development. And so, yeah, I don't know if you had like referenced that, but I'm kind of curious, like, what does that look like in terms
Hmm.
of putting housing stock on the market? So,
Yeah, no, definitely. I think now now that you bring it up, I'm curious to see like what projects out there are actually taking advantage of SB4. I know there have been some concerns in regards to like challenges, right, and working with these sort of these institutions. I was in the Housing California conference in Long Beach earlier this year, and one of the things that were brought up in one of the sessions was, you know, and like for example in Catholic Church, they're like the structure, right? There's more local, regional, and the structure is very there's a lot of levels to it, and so right, one of the things about SB4 is um, it I guess some of the key elements, right, are like the stream approval process, right? So, typically rezoning can be, um, it can take time, right? It can be very expensive. And so with SB4, some of those things are, it's cheaper, right? And so, but one of the challenges that they mentioned, right, at this session I was at was, for example, it's for affordable housing, but a lot of churches, like, they're willing to develop on their property or underutilized part of the property, but they want it to be they want to be selective on like the people they help. And so, for example, people that are probably members of their church, and under SB4, like you can't. There's like fair housing rules that you have to follow, and so that's kind of out of the picture. And so in this session that we're talking about, like now, like churches are finding this out, and so like they don't really want to give up their land if it's not really assisting the people that are part of their church or organization. And so I thought that was very interesting. You know, I understand with the fair housing, but also like churches are very strict, and and things like that. And so, how can I guess the state kind of take that into consideration and kind of work something around it? The fair housing law is there, so I know it'll be very tough. Um, so yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that I've heard in that session was that it was um, how can we make it work? Can there be some sort of preferences, right? I know in other federal programs, if there is going to be some sort of preference in selecting certain population to be um, selected first prior to the general population, there needs to be a whole process behind that. So like usually a plan, and then get like some outreach, kind of stating why are they choosing this preference and what's the need. And so I'm kind of curious to do a little more research into that. But I know where I work, we're working on a affordable housing like site selection tool, and we highlighted a lot of vacant lots, a lot of infill properties with like for example things that we've talked about in the past, right? Like grocery stores, bus stops, and now we added the like church, lots that are zoned for example churches and nonprofit schools. And so that kind of opens up the door for developers that are looking to develop in the city I work at. And so that's just, it's very interesting. It opens a lot more doors to, or possibilities to work around, but working with the organization that might potentially want the affordable housing to be for the people they serve is going to be complicated.
So I don't know if people know this or not, but you're kind of like the housing guru. And so I don't mean or want to put you in a position where I'm asking more questions of you than maybe you have the knowledge base to answer, because I know we've just done some sort of preliminary research. But I'm kind of curious, just from, I mean, this is really opinion based. I mean, we can kind of like sink our heels a little bit into like the foundation of urban planning, but like how did we get here, right? So I'm looking at this article and it's stating that we have about 170,000 acres of undeveloped land that could be used under SB4 to develop affordable housing, right? So what sort of mechanisms are at place where we're in this kind of constant sort of position where it's like we have vacant lots, or we have underutilized lots, or lots that need to be rehabilitated, or in this case vacant property that with a lot of potential and opportunity. So it's like everybody, I think right now, especially you know we're in an election year, people want to know like what are our political leaders doing about housing. And I'm just like, it is hard to answer, but like, how did we get here? It's
Yeah,
not like I understand that this has many facets and complexities, but I mean, at a certain point, like we have to sort of acknowledge that a lot of urban planning practices have resulted in this, right?
yeah. I mean, if I understood the question correctly, I can't really speak on the political side of things. Sometimes I don't understand as a city employee, like I don't understand the, well, I do, right? But also having certain political figures, work so closely with city staff and residents, right? So they kind of know the both worlds. They're kind of they have ties, and so they kind of see, what is the capacity that city employees have or certain departments, and them understanding there might be one or two people just working on one thing, or maybe two like four people working on housing for the whole city, and I like it. There's only so much we can do, right? Because there's capacity. I would say that, like for example, I mentioned that that's the site selecting tool, for affordable housing developers. I think that's a step that we're kind of taking forward to show that us as a city are interested to, first we're identifying what, like for example, the inventory that we have, and a lot this list kind of came from the housing element work that the plan department has been working on for a few months now. And so us kind of showing, we're developing tools to help developers do research on our city, to let them know that we're kind of open and we're committed to taking advantage, for example, of the, other tools that, for example, the state has been working on, maybe SB4. um, and so I can just say that is, I think, capacity has a lot to do. I think, I can speak for the team that I work under. Is we're all committed, and there's only so much I guess we can do during the day. But I would say that there are a lot of projects coming in, not specifically using SB4, but there are a lot of farm worker projects that we are kind of tackling right now. And so one recently passed, and so that was a huge hurdle. So that's going to be 60 units for, or 59 units, one manager unit, at market rate, but for affordable farm worker uh, families. Um, but I do kind of see, like for example, right, as a city employee, like I'm always kind of seeking more trainings, more. I want to get exposed to more projects that are probably taking advantage of like the SB4, Senate bill. So that way we can bring that up and use that as a tool when we're talking to, like in pre-development talks with other developers that they can possibly use, or maybe if a site doesn't really pencil out for them, maybe try reaching out, establishing some sort of relationship with a faith-based organization, and got kind of going from there. I would say also that through some work that we recently have been doing with like community land trust, um, there has been a lot of interest that I've gotten contacted from community-based organizations that are faith-based. And so I find that very interesting. They're always like, hey, like, we're curious about this, we need this. And I'm all ears listening to them, and I'm kind of let them know, like, um, where we're at with things, very, trying to be transparent. And at the end of the call, they're always like, hey, we're here to help. Let me know what for example, like engagement, or if you guys need help with trying to rally people and find support for something. And so I think we're taking the right steps. I'm speaking for where I work, but I'm sure other places in California are as well. But, and one last thing I'll say is, sometimes certain things kind of pile up in financial stacks for projects that make it very comfortable. I mean, very difficult for things to work out. Like for example, affordability periods. I think SB4, affordability requirements. Any housing developed under SB4 must remain affordable for at least 55 years for rentals and 45 years for own units. So I know this kind of talks about ensuring long-term access to affordable housing, right? But also there are other funding sources, maybe in the financial stack, that might only require 20 years of affordability. And so now that project would have to, or the units under that project that might be under SB4 might need to adhere to the either 55 years or the 45 years. So that's also always a challenge because banks and even just developers, like it's a lot longer commitment than what they kind of anticipated, which was maybe only 20 years or whatnot. But yeah.
Yeah. And I guess so. I'm like, as I start to think through this a little bit more and where some of these lots like could potentially be. And so, do you imagine that most of this development is happening in more rural areas, like in the suburbs, dense urban environments?
I think that the very good question, Blair. And so I recent last week I went up to, I think I texted you. I was going up to the California Community Land Trust Network invited me to a workshop in Fresno, and it was in regards to finding financing for community land trust, right? And so we're currently incubating one here in Bakersfield, and so it was that space was very. I appreciate the folks from the California Community Land Trust Network, creating this space for us because we had people from Allensworth, we had people from Fireball, we have people from all over these rural communities, and so they're kind of voicing and they're interested there for, hey, how do we fund our land trust, or and so it was there was I forgot where they were from, but there was a faith based organization that they had a few land that they wanted to find funding for to maybe build on, right? And so I see, and again, it's more rural communities. There was talk about, like, for example, how competitive it is for certain funding sources from that state of California offers that usually are all taken up by either San Francisco, LA, or Southern California, right? And so there was a big talk about like how can, for example, the San Joaquin Valley and its banks kind of partner and collaborate within each other to make it easier for development in more rural communities. So I right now I work in a mid-sized city, but there are a lot of rural communities around us. And again, like I mentioned, I've gotten a lot of feedback from people like smaller cities, right, Lamont or even Arvin, and these are community-based organizations that are, um, they're farm worker communities that are indigenous, and so that's another thing, right? Like there are different types of populations that sometimes don't even get heard, and so like rural cities or rural towns, like sometimes we don't even know they're out there because they're so small and like again capacity, and so like how do bigger cities or maybe more at a regional scale kind of collaborate with them so we can also help them achieve certain goals for housing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about the promise of SB4. I'm really excited about the promise of anything that can put more, housing stock out there. I think I kind of personally have really thought about like why there's so much. I don't know how to say it sort of delicately, but like there's opposition, right, to building housing. And I think we just haven't really figured out like how to make things pencil and really work. And so in order to meet our specific regional goals for getting housing out there and in the ether, we're often looking to as solutions like building bigger and taller and whatever, just so that we can like ensure that we're meeting those numbers, right? And so there's a lot of opposition to that. I know like a lot of towers in like just San Francisco as an example, like in some of those more suburban feeling like neighborhoods that are kind of like off the beaten path of downtown. they're really opposed to that, and so they've scaled them down, they've scaled them down. And so like I'm a big proponent of like human scale development, and I think as we find new opportunities to get more housing on the table, I think that the possibilities, the doors really open and they start to widen, right? And so once we can kind of figure out these avenues that we can go down, these opportunities, I think that, it'll kind of just have like that snowballing effect, right? So if we have SB4 as kind of this loophole and it's successful, there's just seems to be more potential there. And so I'm always excited to talk about opportunities for housing. I think everybody is. It's complex. We understand, we've ourselves like crunched numbers and like analyzed projects to see whether or not they pencil. And there's like so many costs associated with that. And even outside of that, we're looking at infrastructure and yeah, like just the real costs of developing like naked land, right? But
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think Senator Scott Wiener is a warrior. He's been hard at work. And so I'm excited to, yeah, see what else he kind of puts out there. But he's sort of like a anomaly. I don't know.
for sure. No, I think so. Kind of going back a little bit, right, on the types of development, and so I think, for example, rural communities here in the San Joaquin Valley, um, or central, Central Valley, it's a very interesting time because there is a lot of historical context or historical events that happened in the past, and with the Central Valley being the area that's probably most affordable in California, we're getting a lot of the like people from Southern California maybe moving over to Central Valley exploring for more, home ownership opportunities or even investing in property, right? And so how I think it's a very interesting opportunity, or time for the Central Valley, because kind of what we were for, right, Blair? Like we're more about like again, people first approach in development, like making sure whatever comes in, making sure that there's not displacement, and if it is potentially projects that are going to cause displacement, like is there options for the residents there to kind of stay, or even like if they're homeowners, right, like are we providing the right, maybe providing educational material for them to understand, like, hey, your value went up, but maybe it might even go up higher in 5 10 years from now. And so just providing tools for them to make the right decision. And so I think in the Central Valley, like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of indigenous groups and communities. And so with that being said, like I think displacement is real. And so again, kind of, I don't want to get too off track here, but like with SB4, right? So um I kind of see, some of the from my experience, there are a lot of like indigenous groups that might not identify with certain religion, or groups that can be covered under this. And so it'd be interesting, like how they can collaborate to maybe like help each other out, because there, when developers are coming in or maybe buying up land, and that's why there's a lot more community land trust talk in the Central Valley, because there should be no way that these neighborhoods that where these people have probably lived for all their lives or maybe generations, should be influenced more by it. These neighborhoods should not be influenced more by people that don't live there than the ones that actually live there. And so I think, kind of thinking about some of the projects that we worked on in school, right? I know you had suggested for that Pasadena project for the 710 stub, like healing centered uh, engagement. And so I think that that's a good opportunity for like whatever project does come in for housing, to maybe even to consider that, right? To if they're working on some sort of community benefits plan or um, services that maybe the housing can bring, because it can, like I mentioned, a lot of the farm worker housing offers other like community rooms that might not be covered with certain funding sources, but they're building them to provide classes for either language or using computers, how to be more financial classes and whatnot. And so I think maybe developers, if they're introduced to like this healing centered approach, I think it can help them understand more of the historical events that happened in the Central Valley. With, again, a lot of people think redlining is only like in urban areas, but I feel like it also happen because in urban areas because of the physical built environment. But there's also a lot of that happening that happened here in the Central Valley. So it don't want to go too far off topic, but I think SB4 and programs like this or initiatives like this can open up doors for doing proper community engagement and how to like tailor a certain project to the community it's coming into.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really important detail, and I'm glad that you brought that up because I think I don't know what your experience is, but when we look at different housing typologies, like there still is that tendency with housing to like build ground floor retail. And in my experience, at least, I'd say like since the pandemic on, or maybe even before the pandemic, like most of those storefronts are vacant. They've never actually had any tenants move in and utilize the ground floor, right? And so I think SB4 provides an opportunity for deeper engagement, right? And the potential to actually build housing, like you said, like for the people that really makes sense, kind of based on the history, the context, their needs, and also because of the types of institutions that are at play here, right? You can have just, yeah, just like I think really like it will bring up more meaningful dialogues and really be a way to connect communities instead of, divide them, which can sometimes happen with big development projects. So yeah, I love all of that.
Yeah.
Again, just being super clear, like this isn't something a topic I'm super educated on. I think it's interesting, and so I think we both welcome like comments, or if anyone listening wants to add some info, tips, advice, thoughts, whatever, I'm
Or
open and down for it.
yeah, or if there are in your community, if there's maybe a project that's kind of taking advantage of SB4, we'd love to hear about it
Yeah,
and maybe give that project a highlight. Just it's good to talk about the good, and I think it's better to talk about what's not working because it opens up room for again discussion and more ways to kind of innovate and kind of tackle that challenge.
yeah.
So yeah,
Well said.
yeah. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we appreciate you guys like always sending you good vibes. And again, Blair, it's a pleasure to chat it up with you again.
Pleasure to chat it up with you too. Peace.
Peace.